All right, I will make a start. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, bright and early, once again on a Thursday. I'm Stella, I'm the Partnerships Director here at Forward Action, and we have Alicia with us today as well. She's in the background, she's our Partnerships Officer, and she's making sure that everything works well. So I think many of you, like I'm looking at the names, I think most of you know who we are, but just for those of you who don't, we are a digital mobilization agency, and we work with some incredible charities and progressive causes to help them grow and strengthen their communities and maximize their impact. And the way we do this is by developing digital strategies and using lots of different digital, tactics, channels, and tools to help our partners find their people, their audiences online, audiences who share their values, and motivate those audiences to take action, whether that's making donations or campaigning or any other valuable actions that our partners want to put forward. Today's session, we're running it because many of you have told us in a survey we did last year, but also in conversations we're having with people in this sector more generally, that you know that the general election is a huge opportunity this year for you and your organizations, and one that you can't miss, but that you're either not quite sure exactly what the opportunity is, like, are you maximizing it fully, or that you maybe have very, very clearly defined roles, but you're maybe not quite sure how to achieve them. So we hope that today we can help you on both counts. We could be here for the whole day if we wanted to, because there's just so much we could potentially cover. So what we have done is focus on those themes that keep coming up again and again as we work with our partners to help them develop their general election strategies. So that's something that we've been doing quite a lot of in the last few months. And if after today's session you feel like there's value in reaching out to us, and if there's anything we can do to help, please do. We always love chatting to people. So what we'll be doing is sharing some examples of tactics that we've seen that have been successful in elections here in the UK, elsewhere, and kind of some thinking that we will hope will inspire you. And we will also look at what impact means in the round. We're a digital mobilization agency. We like to think of impact in many different ways. So today you will hear from two amazing colleagues. We have Helen Hector here today and Barry Cochrane. Helen is our strategy director here at Forward Action, and she leads on all things strategy and innovation. And Barry is Forward Action's chief executive. Together, they have been driving a lot of our general election thinking and really helping our partners be really ambitious and bold in the coming year. So I will be handing over to Barry in just one moment. Before I do so, just a couple of housekeeping things. You're very, very welcome to enable closed captions if you need them. And I can see that a few people already have, which is great. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. So please share them through the Q&A box that you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. And we will take notes of them and then sharing them with Barry and Helen at the end. And if you have any tech issues at all, just let us know, so you can message hosts directly. So Alicia and I will be able to see that, or just post a message in the chat. And somebody has asked if the slides will be available afterwards. We can send them to you. So, just drop us a line and we can send them over to you. That's not a problem at all. Right, I will hand over to Barry.
Yeah, thanks, Stella. This is just a run through of, it's lovely that so many people are here with us today, and looking forward to running through this stuff with you. This is what we're going to be running through. It's worth saying that we've got loads of examples and lots to get through. So it's all pretty top line. So we don't go into great detail in terms of sort of how to do things. But as Stella says, if any of it sparks your interest or you want to hear more, we'd be really happy to chat more about it. So we'll start by just talking through sort of what the challenges and opportunities are this year. Then we'll have a whole section on how we think the election and digital mobilizing and organizing during it can help you achieve your goals. And then there's time for a Q&A afterwards. Oops. So what is the opportunity? So almost all of us, whatever we campaign on, seek to change government policy. This is just a selection of any number of petitions out there to the government. But the government that we have at the moment has really shifted from the Rwanda policy to the Palestine conflict, taxes on energy companies, managing the sewage crisis, and so on. This government has refused to act, like even in the face of quite unprecedented public pressure. There have definitely been some wins, impressive ones, but it's slim picking. So really, for the last few years, we've been kind of banging our heads against a wall, exhausting ourselves trying to influence this government. But this election is a chance to change that. As we all know, it's looking very likely that Labour will win. They're projected now to have a landslide. But obviously that in itself isn't enough to deliver the change that we want to see. Not only have we seen electoral reform, electoral upsets like before, if Labour do win, we need to make sure that they win with a public mandate to drive the change that we want to see. And at the moment, we're not necessarily seeing that be the context we've had. So to do that, we need to work hard this year and beyond. These are just some of the opportunities that we've kind of pulled out. The election, even within that context, feels like an opportunity to fast track change, because in an election year, we know political parties are more focused than ever on what people think, because their core aim is persuading enough of us to vote for them so that they win. So that means this is like one of the biggest opportunities that we have for people power to drive change, but we need to be campaigning at scale to make sure that we can achieve it. We also know that most people are motivated to act when there's a clear deadline or moment of opportunity, and the election gives us that really clearly. Another key ingredient is a well-articulated theory of change with a tangible role for people. And again, that's basically baked into an election campaign, because the whole premise is using our individual vote to bring in the government we want to see. However, we may feel that that process needs to be reformed quite significantly to actually mean something. But anyway, and it also provides a heightened moment of conversation that helps us to change attitudes. So during the short election period, at least, there is a national conversation about the change that we want to see. So although the issues that hit the spotlight obviously tend to be crafted quite carefully by party strategies, being ready to capitalise on any responsive moments when your cause does hit the headlines can really help to speed up your influence. And people are also, in that context, looking for voices of authority on issues being debated, because there's a lot of kind of back and forth. And so we need to be ready with informative educational opportunities to put in front of people. And we see there as being like a two-pronged approach to impact this election. So the first that we need to kind of work together towards is providing that public mandate for change and making sure that the narrative around the election and the narrative after the election is all about driving progressive change and showing parties that that is what the UK population wants from them, wants to see. And as part of that, we also need to be building a base to hold the next government accountable. And to achieve both of those things, as I've just said, we need to be ready to jump on those opportunities that the national conversation provides. But there are some challenges. These are just a few of them. I think one is that in previous election periods, we may have had significant influence on Labour policies, and then them sort of developing policies that we want to see then puts pressure on the Conservatives to move towards that. But this time around, they're so far ahead in the polls that they're less likely to listen to our policy demands. And that's really been indicated by recent behaviour in relation to, for example, reneging on their climate promises. And that's a really difficult campaigning space for us to exist in. I think historically, we haven't really managed to have much impact during election periods. It's really hard to engage people in the long election period. And we're often stuck in the space of sort of, for example, trying to influence party political candidates, which is really far too technical for people to be motivated by or understand. And there are, of course, limitations which we won't go into today, but placed on us by the Lobbying Act, which can mean that a lot of us feel nervous about what we do this year, also about what we can or can't say, and we don't necessarily have the resources to register. I still think you can do very effective campaigning this year without that, but maybe that's another time. And then, although we've obviously talked about it being a chance to change attitudes, in an election year, the parties have most of the time already decided what they want to talk about, and that will be what they're talking about, and they kind of drive that narrative. So it can be very hard to punctuate that with issues that sit outside of these. So we're here today to think about how digital mobilising and organising can help you achieve your goals this year. But first, we want to hear from you, and I'm going to hand over to Helen for that.
Hi everyone. Okay, so we're going to start with a quick poll because we wanted to find out what you're thinking about when it comes to general election work. So yeah, what's brought you here today? hopefully the poll will pop up in your Zoom. I can see it, so hopefully you can. So it's a very simple question. What are your main goals in this election year? So feel free to pick more than one if you've got multiple goals. We're just keen to see the spread of issues that we're all thinking about already. So we'll do it quite quick. Hopefully everyone's been able to vote. Are we able to see the results already, Alicia?
Oh, sorry guys, we've lost. Post them in the chat.
Oh, brilliant.
And I can share what I'm seeing. So yeah, great. Okay, so we are about 37% of people are saying campaign impact, and that is the biggest result, closely followed by raising the profile of your cause.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stella. Yeah, there's actually quite a good spread across all those goals. But yeah, I think the campaign impact one, that's kind of what we expected to see. Is definitely what we've been hearing when we've been talking to organisations about what their goals are this year. So if we could skip on very to the next slide. And the next one. So yeah, so today's webinar, we split it into 4 of the most important goals that, as I say, we've been hearing about organisations having in this general election year. As we've just seen from the poll, not everyone will be doing all of these, but we're hoping that today, as well as getting some ideas around the goals that you are working towards, you might even leave with a new goal that you hadn't considered, because we think there's lots of ways that you can do all 4 of these things and have a lot of impact. So I'm going to go back to Berry for the first one.
So yeah, it's interesting that campaign impact came up so high. I'm very passionate about that too. And I think building your base was quite low. But actually, I suppose we see building your base as quite crucial to delivering impacts this year. So yeah, and we think this is a crucial opportunity to fill your list with people eager to take meaningful action, and meaningful action is how you ultimately drive impact. So actually, this will be the longest section that I'll talk you through, because we think that it's really the fundamental foundation from which to achieve the other goals. Sorry. So I think this is about building a movement for change and to drive that ahead of the election, but also to ensure that you're set up for success once the new government is in place, because we don't know what that campaigning landscape looks like, but we know that we are going to need people to continue to drive forward that change that we want to see. And there are 4 key elements that you need to consider and that we regularly work with partners on. I'll talk through all of these in turn. But to summarize, I think briefly, we believe the best approach to building your base combines the strength of mobilizing and organizing methodologies to maximize the reach of your asks and ensure that you're really achieving that impact and that change this year. And that can include building on our tried and tested techniques of bringing people on board to campaign. That's using sort of mass values-based recruitment methods that are optimized to encourage ongoing engagement. So it's not just about that kind of first point of contact and bringing in the numbers, it's making sure you're bringing in the right people who are connected to your values, that they're going to carry on taking that action with you. And then using that as a foundation to develop maybe a volunteer-led program at scale that will help to deliver that message far and wide and educate in communities and create localized pressure for change. And as part of all of that is like making it as easy as possible for people to engage at every stage through good UX best practice and ongoing testing and optimization. But before you get started, I'm sure you all know this, you need a clear strategy. And I think even if you have that, it's important, like maybe after this, to go back and look at it and think, well, how does digital mobilization fit into this? And where could adding an organizing component deliver more impact and more income this year? Once you know what you're trying to achieve and how, you can develop a clear supporter theory of change, which is going to be fundamental to motivating people to act with you. So it's about having a tangible role for people that you can communicate clearly to them. And that helps people really see their role in achieving change with you, and also make them more likely to join in with you and see you as a credible partner for their sort of time, money and voice this year. And of course, with all of this, you need to make sure that you've got the right tech in place to drive that action that you want to see at scale. So you need to make sure your sign-up pages are clean, have clean and clear UX, and make it as easy as possible to take action with you. Use A/B tests to make sure you're finding that right proposition and also that you're optimizing the UX. So we work with loads of partners delivering lots of testing and optimization, and we consistently see that even the tiniest change can have a massive impact on conversion with slight tweaks in copy or changes of position of elements on a page can really lead to like a 3-fold increase in results. Yes, sorry, user experience, apologies. And our advice is really never launch a page without having a test running, because you really want to be building on those learnings and constantly optimizing to make sure you're making the most of any contact point that you achieve. And that should be applied whether you're asking people to sign a petition to or to register to volunteer. Make the process as smooth as possible and you will see better results. And of course, if you are kind of in the organising space, tech can also help you facilitate peer-to-peer texting and organising, phone bank initiatives, and you can use it to sort of mobilise around things like hustings and through local MPs. You can use existing commercial tools like Slack and WhatsApp to help you organise, host webinars to help onboard people and Zoom calls to intro them. You can do virtual lobbying events for engaged supporters and to help build that supporter base. And if you're working with volunteers at scale, which I don't know how many of you will be doing that, but there is an amazing tool out there that ChangeLab have developed called Movement, which allows volunteers to manage their own communications across email, WhatsApp, SMS, calling and more. And we'll include a link to that when we share this recording. But the NEU used it really effectively last year in a recent mobilisation of teachers around a strike, and they won their call. So it's a very good piece of tech if you're not aware of it already. And then you want to make sure you're making the most of all channels. So you want to meet people where they are. So really important with all of this is understanding that you know who you're trying to reach, and then thinking about like, where are they most active and what kind of content are they responding to? And then think about how those spaces align with your tone of voice. And also the obvious one is reaching out to influencers who really share your values in those spaces as a way to really communicate with the people and reach more people. But really you want to think about what asks you're putting in front of them once you're reaching them, and what you're sharing in that space. And we really feel that in an election year, that scale of action is really important to build that public mandate for change, and to define that post-election narrative. So classic digital mobilization techniques that we deliver with partners all the time can support this well. So on here, you've got open letters, hand raisers, quizzes, always centering your organization's values, which really helps to bring people in at scale, but also in a meaningful way, like I said, that really drives that ongoing action with you. And there can be some skepticism, I know, about these entry-level actions leading to impact. But if people power is part of your theory of change, then without people, and lots of them, particularly this year, you'll not be able to achieve impact. So this has to be the first step, really, in any successful mobilization program. And then, I'm sure you all know this already, but by developing a strong email program full of meaningful actions to keep people engaged, you'll ensure that strong supporter experience and good response rates across the year and beyond. And we recommend that partners send sort of at least one email a week, but always with one single call to action. And that across those emails and across that email program, you have a variety of asks that ask for people to share their time, money and voice, and don't sort of focus too much on any one of those. We see time and time again that by having that mix of asks that really helps to meet different people with their different needs and their different intentions can drive longer term loyalty and ultimately helps you deliver on all of your organizational objectives more effectively. And we think like now, really, if you've never done it before, now is the time to enter into asking people to do something bigger during an election period. The campaigning culture changes, with canvassing obviously is a really big ask from political parties, and people are kind of generally motivated to do something big. So this election provides a compelling proposition to motivate volunteers, and it can also help you reach out to new audiences to include in your volunteer community, including people of colour and younger people who are generally underrepresented in this sector. And if you are going to be investing all the money and time into building your audience at scale, then it's really important that you have these meaningful asks to follow up with so that people are really understanding why they're investing that time, money and voice with you. And if organising is part of your strategy, then canvassing is a really obvious ask to include. And I just wanted to really quickly talk through a great example of this that Greenpeace is running, which is their Project Climate Vote, which many of you may have seen. And it seeks to mobilise volunteers around the country to basically bring out the climate vote. They have a really clear theory of change. They want to get 1 million people to pledge to vote on climate to show the parties that it is a vote winner. And so in this context, Ruby, canvassing is literally canvassing. They're knocking door to door, asking people to vote, to pledge that they will vote based on the climate. So they have a really clear role for people to pledge as climate voters, which is kind of, I suppose, the easy ask where you can just sort of sign up to say, I will be a climate voter. But they're also asking people to volunteer to help recruit more. And they're asking those people to organise in their local areas, to have door knocking approaches where they literally canvass door to door to encourage people to pledge to be a climate voter, to really build that scale, to drive that public mandate for change. And they put the word out with great content on social. So you can see some really good posts that they've put out here. And they've also driven great response through their email list. They've offered Zoom welcome calls for people who do want to take part in that volunteering. And they're also organising days of action. So they're kind of, even within the election focal point of action, they're creating other focal points of action so people can come together to really do that work together. And it is working. You can see from the social posts that they knocked on over 1,000 doors in Kingswood ahead of that recent by-election, which is an amazing number of doors and number of points of contact to have at that sort of personal level to get people to pledge to be climate voters. But obviously you don't have to be thinking at that scale. That's massive. Greenpeace have huge resources. They also have an existing volunteer network and the infrastructure to support it. But you can be engaging volunteers in a number of asks and also keeping it in the sort of online space. You can build networks of people ready to respond with you at key moments, create WhatsApp groups like this one that's on here from Hope Not Hate to kind of mobilize people at key moments, or use this as an opportunity to build a WhatsApp channel, which is a great new tool that they've developed. And UNICEF's here, they've got over 1 million people following them, and it drives really good response rates from those people who are quite engaged and being on those channels where they want to receive communication. Obviously, as people's inboxes are really crowded. You can ask people to create content of their own relating to your issues that they can then share on social media, which provides obviously a very authentic engagement with those issues and helps to get your message out. And you can create toolkits that help them do this easily and with confidence. You can get people to do phone banking, to call people up and drive them to act or to give to your cause. You can have like a set group of people who are happy to be disruptive on social media. So when we do have these responsive moments, which Helen will talk more about, you can really call on them to kind of act with you really quickly in ways that you know they'll be committed to doing. And I really think Nextdoor is an app that we need to be exploring more in the campaigning space, and having a sort of set group of volunteers who can organise themselves in terms of how they use Nextdoor to lead on local campaigning is a really great way, I think, of meaningfully engaging people this year. There's basically loads you can do. And finally, I just think it's worth noting that we talk about easy entry points, but it is important to say that the easiest entry point for people is the one that resonates with them. So when we hit them with the right ask at the right time, and we shouldn't always assume that that is going to be the sort of lowest bar ask. If what we are trying to do this year is mobilize volunteers, it is worth testing asking people directly to volunteer, because there is a cohort of people out there and that is what they are ready to do. So this is just a quick example of some work that M&R, who's the agency behind the benchmarks, which you may have seen, the benchmark study, they did some work with Planned Parenthood in the States, who needed to mobilize quickly ahead of the Supreme Court vote on abortion rights. And they'd been recruiting volunteers through a two-step model, so bringing in at scale through those petition or hand raiser actions, and then converting them to volunteers. And that was coming in at about $300 per volunteer. But M&R worked with them to test direct to volunteer asks, and they drove that cost down to $6.60. So to build your base and be effective this year, we don't think we should be scared of asking people to step up. We should meet people where they are and drive action from there. I'm going to hand over to Helen now.
Thanks, Berry. So the next area that we are going to talk about is raising the profile of your cause. So it can feel very noisy and crowded in an election. So you might wonder, why bother to try and do this? So I think it's easy to forget as well, because we're so immersed in our causes, that for a large percentage of the population, our issues are often not really the stuff of their everyday conversations. And an election does change that to some extent. And as people are deciding who they're going to vote for, I think there is an opportunity to bring our issues into those conversations that people are having. We go on to the next slide, Berry. So why bother? Basically, we think you can capitalise on the mainstreaming of political debate. You can push your cause front and centre of conversations and create that public mandate for change. And we've simplified how you can do that into 4 steps. And we're going to give you some examples of what each of these could look like if you're using mobilisation tactics. So the first step is to be alert and responsive. That just means monitoring the news, looking for political milestones coming up, and looking for those opportunities to respond. Sorry, can we just go back to the previous one, Barry? Amplifying your reach. So when you found those moments that you want to respond to, putting really well-timed digital content out there, and driving that reach right up. And that in turn will help you shift the debate. So as well as your increased reach, you should be having multiplying conversations through your volunteers that Barry was just talking about, and also through your advocacy teams, and then which will hopefully lead to the ultimate impact that we want to have, which is a change in attitudes. So just to look at those in a bit more detail. So being alert and responsive, I think this means two things. So first, it means monitoring the news, monitoring digital channels, and being ready to react when you see something that links into your cause. I think it also means planning ahead around milestones that we know are going to come up in an election cycle. So for example, we know there will be an announcement at some point that an election is happening. That will be the first milestone. We know there will be manifesto launches. So that looks like just being ready to analyse those, have your teams ready to do that, and be ready to go out on digital channels really quickly with a response to that. We know there will be speeches. Is that it allows you to move really fast. So one example of a planned moment are the TV debates that always happen in the run-up to an election, as well as being ready to react if your issue comes up in one of those debates. But realistically, for many of us, we don't expect that to happen, but there's lots of other things that will happen around those debates that you can jump onto. So any controversy around, for example, party leaders not showing up to debates, there will be memes, there will be things that you can piggyback on and join the conversation. And then, of course, there's always they're unplanned, but those party moments, party leader moments, sorry, that we all remember. Ed Miliband eating a bacon sandwich, Boris stuck on a zip line, Rishi trying to look like a normal person. Like, they're really good moments that if you can find a link to your cause, you will just get a lot of reach and a lot of attention. So yeah, this is an example of the Where's Theresa hashtag that sprung up when she didn't show up for a debate, and lots of organisations use this to kind of link to their issues really effectively. So look for the lighter side in elections, join in with those memes. They're much more likely to get shared and to travel. Two more examples here. I think we all remember the Trust Lettuce live stream, which was a brilliant idea. Lots of organisations piggybacked on that. And then there's another one here. I don't know if you can spot the typo in this. I think it's a Lib Dem statement that was put out by the Lib Dems. A climate group jumped on this brilliantly and created some really good content around that typo. So these kind of moments can really boost your reach. I think the other important thing to mention, though, is that reach in itself is meaningless. So make sure you've always got a really strong call to action baked into your content. So if you're having fun, if you're being reactive, even if you're being super serious, that you've got something for people to do as well as share. So those approaches are examples of ways to raise your profile on digital channels at quite a big scale. But there's also lots of smaller volume, but really high impact tactics you can use to really start shifting the debates. So local hustings, these are now very much digital as well as in person. Hustings just mean when party candidates are out and about in the community in the run-up to an election, meeting with different groups of people, and it's an opportunity to kind of put questions to them. So you can mobilise your existing supporters around hustings. You should be sending emails, letting them know that they're happening in their local area, asking them to turn up, perhaps giving them ideas for questions that they could ask about your issues. We've pulled this example from Friends of the Earth. I think I saw someone on the chat from there today. Just a really great example. They offer lots of resources for volunteers to organise their own hustings even with candidates, which is a really great tactic. And then there's those doorstep conversations that Barry's already talked about. I'm sure you will know this, but as candidates start canvassing in the run up to an election, the conversations they're having on those doorsteps, they're very carefully monitored. All that information is fed back to party headquarters, and then the party will shape their election strategy based on what they're hearing on those doorsteps. So it's a really effective intervention point for us if we're campaigning. So think about how you can use digital to mobilize your supporters to bring up your issue when someone knocks on their door asking for their vote. So for example, that could be, we've lost the slides. I'll keep talking.
I think we've lost Barry.
We've lost Barry. Oh no. Okay. Let me see. I will share my screen. Please bear with me. I'm just going to take 1 minute to get my screen set up so that this looks okay. Sorry, folks. Live TV and all that.
In the meantime, keep sending us your questions. Alicia and I have been collating them in the background, and we'll be asking them at the end.
There we go. Can you now see that okay? That works, Stella?
Yes. Thanks, Helen.
Okay, apologies. That's where we were. Yes. So what was I saying? Yeah. So could you, for example, send out emails to your supporters with talking points, with leaflets that they could print out and have by their door? Could you send people a link to order stickers that have got your talking points in? How can you intervene in those doorstep conversations? And this is a great example of taking this tactic to the very highest level. I know this is out of reach for most of us, but when possible, ran a petition with 38 Degrees asking party leaders to show up to a climate debate. It worked. I think I saw that some people from Possible here, so well done, brilliant action. But yeah, of course, this won't work for every issue. You know, it needs to be something that's already fairly high on the public agenda. But this is an example of the right ask at the right time, addressed to the right target, and just shows what you can do if you really have high ambitions. So now we're going to go on and talk about raising money. So fundraising, it might not feel like an obvious goal to have during an election, but I think many of us, that will be a kind of core organisational priority that's not going away this year. And there are definitely ways that you can leverage the election to help you raise more money. So that's what we're going to talk about. So we need to deliver our services, we need to keep running our campaigns, and the election actually does provide a really good why now. I think there's also a lot we can learn from political parties who would do a really good job of recognising donating as a core part of campaigning. And then a follow-on from that is, this is thinking about pre-election, but also thinking about post-election period. That first 100 days of government, make sure you've got a really strong proposition for that period of time. Why is donating to you at that moment something that's really important for people to do, and be ready to go out with that fundraising messaging? So 4 steps to go about doing that. Barry's already talked about building your base, but again, that is just such a critical first step if you're going to do digital fundraising and you're going to do it successfully. And then I think offering meaningful asks and really varied asks, it's a core mobilization principle. We talk about it a lot. I think it's worth stating over and over again. And all this means is that don't just send campaigning asks to people who signed a petition. Don't just send financial asks to people that donated. Mix up your asks. Ask people for different shares of their time, money, and voice when you're emailing them or texting them or talking to them, whatever you're doing. And always giving them a really clear explanation of the impact that those things will have. And then the third thing is to really carefully craft your fundraising proposition. This is the really hard bit. We know it's not easy to do. We've helped a lot of organisations try to do it. From all the testing we've done, we know that this makes such a huge difference in whether people will actually donate to you. You can do all the work to build your base. You can get brilliant asks in front of millions of people. If that fundraising proposition isn't right, people just won't give you the money. So test it a lot. And make sure you can really pull apart that story of why a small donation is going to have impact on the bigger change that you're trying to achieve. And then finally, being responsive. This is another core mobilization principle. But again, time and time again, we see that fundraising works so much better when it's a reaction to something, when there's a moment happening in the world, and you're part of that solution, and people will be really ready to give to you. So we've pulled in some examples here of fundraising emails from political parties because we really wanted to show you how they do this really well. And they turn giving money into a form of activism. So in all these emails, you'll see that giving is the most important thing you can do at that moment in time to help them win. And that's a really compelling proposition. You've also got that kind of time-bound, do this now, there's a deadline coming, reason to donate. And then I've also pulled in a couple of emails from organizations. These are just two that happened to land in my inbox recently. I don't think we wrote them. No, we didn't write them, but they're really brilliant. They both have fundraising asks in, but they both use the election as a leverage point for that. So we've got one here from Good Law Project. They're working on voter ID campaign anyway, which has a link to the election, but they've been able to kind of explain why they're doing that, tell a really emotive story as part of that message, and then pivot to asking people to donate to make sure that they can do this work, which works really well. And then there's an email here from Just Treatment, which again is brilliant. They go behind the scenes, and I think in here somewhere they say, this is our game plan for the election. They're telling you what their plans are, what their secrets are, what they want to do. And then they pull out some very specific things that they need money for to do that. So they talk about media training for patients to tell their stories. They talk about transport to events, and that makes it really tangible. And you can see where your money would go if you donated. So there are definitely ways that you can do that. If you're not registering under the Lobbying Act, you can even make that part of your narrative. I know there won't be a huge amount of public awareness about it. If your campaigns are going a bit quiet for a while, you can explain that to people. Say you're going to be back after the election, you've got lots of important work to do, and can they donate in the meantime to keep you going? And then also, I think if your issues are in the spotlight and political leaders are talking about what you're working on, then you can offer a really good alternative to kind of any empty promises or things that the public might feel about politicians by saying how you're already tackling this problem. And here's a really direct way that people can help. And then finally, we just wanted to share this example from the US because it's a very specific context, but there's so many transferable lessons here, and it's a masterclass in effective fundraising. So after Trump was elected in 2016, you might remember the ACLU, they raised about $1 million in 24 hours. And that was just because they tapped into this feeling that so many people had, that, you know, we're in for a rough ride, things are going to get tough. We need to come together and we need to get organized. And it broke all kinds of fundraising records for them. I think obviously, if we have a Labour government, we won't have a kind of same villain in the same way. But I think what this tells you is that you need to be ready for whatever the result of the election is, and to kind of have your fundraising propositions planned and really think about why people giving to you in that first 100 days is something that they have to do. And Barry's back, so I'm going to hand over. Are you all right for me to carry on sharing, or do you want to switch?
Yeah, no, if that's all right with you. I'm so sorry. My Wi-Fi dropped out for like the first time in about 6 months. Of course, just chose this morning to do that. So sorry. Yeah, achieving impact. Obviously, everything we've talked about already is about achieving impact, and we've I hope made that clear. But there are some things that we thought that it would be worth you considering in your campaigning this year that it was worth tuning into specifically. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, I think one thing to say is that wanting to achieve everything that's on this slide, we've known for a long time that petitions will rarely influence targets directly. But now I think that most of the digital tactics that we use meet the same fate, really. So emailing your MP often doesn't really generate much more than a template reply and no real movement on policy. And even doing kind of like big social storms that politicians have just ridden so many of them out that it's just diminishing returns. It doesn't mean those things aren't important to do, and that they don't contribute to a broader picture of change. But it does also mean that we really need to be pivoting to other things and thinking differently about how we can create impact in this new context. So we need to think more creatively. And so it's worth thinking about who you target with your campaign. So we're obviously talking about essentially driving political change in this conversation, but that doesn't always mean that you need to directly target politicians with that ask. So don't always go directly for who you're trying to influence. Sometimes, but especially this year, because they'll be being bombarded. So think instead about who influences them and who might be more susceptible to public pressure. And again, that really helps you drive through that very clear supporter theory of change in your messaging. This is a really great example that's on the screen at the moment, which is Freedom from Torture. When they were developing their strategy for the Rwanda plan, they knew the government wasn't going to budge. They'd sort of made that clear. So they decided to tackle it from another angle and focus on the airline that had been commissioned to run the flights. And they used a lot of tactics that we might all use, like they used emails, they used calls, they used comments on posts. They also did do some really brilliant on-the-ground confrontation, going to their offices in Spain and also disrupting a key aviation conference, videoing those things, getting them back out into social media to really kind of make sure that was a very public embarrassment for the airline. And the airline were much more susceptible to this pressure, and they were much more surprised by the tactics that Freedom from Torture used. So next slide. They won. Next slide, Helen, sorry. Thank you. It didn't stop, obviously, the Rwanda plan. Unfortunately, that is still being something that the government is committed to delivering, but it did hugely derail their delivering of it. And that is really powerful, impactful campaigning that really came from a place of thinking creatively about target. Another key rule that we think is really important this year is not sticking to our tried and tested spaces. Again, they have their role, they're important, don't desert them, but also think beyond them, because actually for our targets now, this really is business as usual. They're very used to staring down any disruption in those spaces. So we need to think about expanding out to other apps that we all use and that our targets aren't so used to being disrupted in. So like use their calendars, use Reddit, use LinkedIn, use the phone, use Google reviews, try apps like Nextdoor. Mainly the most important lesson is like analyzing where your targets are, where they're trying to build their brand and share their message, and where you are less likely to be, and then turn up there in sort of surprising ways. And in the crowded space, content is also really important. So it's really important to be disruptive and think about who your messengers are in the content that you're sharing. So these are some of my favorite like doorstepping videos from the last few years. And they've all got some of the same things in common, which is the right message, the right messenger at the right time in an unexpected place. And it forces the target to respond and enables us to disrupt their status quo. It also means these videos then go quite massive on social media, which then drives traditional media. And most of these videos also ended up in traditional media, including conservative media, which obviously then has the knock-on effect of impacting the targets. And actually, India and Jack, who worked on the middle one of these two videos, are trying to work with organisations this year to help them find their messengers and create compelling content that resonates in the election year. So we'll share their details when we share a recording of this with you. Next slide, please. Sorry. And we need to be thinking about also not just where we are and the content we're producing, but also the tactics and tools that are going to help us achieve the change we want to see. As we've said, petitions, hand raisers, open letters, they all have their role. And we've seen how they can really help you build your base, which is fundamental. But we do need to be thinking beyond these to develop new tactics that contribute directly to impact. This is a really great example, I think, from Nossas in Brazil. There's loads of detail to it, but quick rundown is their aim was to register younger voters. In Brazil, you have to register to vote if you're under 18. And they were trying to think of the best way to do that. And ultimately, they thought younger people, mobilizing younger people to vote was the best way. And the best way to motivate younger people to do that was to run a competition where they could win iPads and other things like that that they wanted. So they mobilized young people across Brazil, all angling to win. That brought media attention. Influencers got involved, supported the campaign, and it became a massive part of the national conversation. I feel that this idea would be immediately dismissed in any organisation that I would have worked in. I think we'd shut it down as like immediately superficial, but actually they really made it work. And many of the young people that took part are now very involved in politics. And it was unexpected, and it really connected very specifically with the audience they were trying to reach. Next slide, please. But most importantly, it was hugely impactful So partly as a result of this work, Brazil gained 2,116,781 voters aged 16 to 18, and Bolsonaro lost by almost exactly that number of votes. So they really tuned in to who they were trying to reach, what appealed to them, and how they can make that most impactful. I think that's a really great lesson for all of us. On a much smaller scale, this is from Greenpeace, where they asked their supporters to target Shell on LinkedIn posts, which I think is again good. It's not where Shell are used to being targeted. Next slide, please. They built a tool to make this as easy as possible to do so. And I think it's a good example of just thinking about where are your targets? Where are they least expecting you to be? Ensuring you're being more disruptive and ultimately more impactful. And I think you might get smaller numbers doing these kind of asks, but you don't need as many numbers, as many people doing something when you're in unexpected spaces. We're really running out of time. There are also some great tools out there to ensure you're optimizing your ad spend for impact. So on here, we've got Who Targets Me, which you can use to map party and organizational spending so that you can see who's targeting who with what content, and then optimize your spend in the space that it makes most sense. The middle one is a tool designed by ChangeLab called Pinpoint, which you can use to create localized creative and campaigns to meet change makers where they're at. And then also explore geofencing ads to hit political or other targets you know will be in a particular place at a particular time, hit them with ads, and also combine that with some on-the-ground mobilization to hit them from all angles. And finally, be ready for your first 100 days. Helen has already sort of mentioned this, and hopefully your policy and campaigns teams are already working on it. Our role is to make sure digital is part of that thinking. So you're going to use this year to build that audience ready to hold the new government to account. But you need to be quick off the mark when election results are in, to be out there with your social posts, your emails, asking people to engage with their new MPs and capitalize on the public emotion that will exist. There'll many people will have new MPs that they either voted for or didn't vote for, and you want to make sure that they're contacting them about your issues. The way to do that is to follow all the rules we've already talked about and also be the first out there with your message. And as with fundraising, ACLU is a perfect example of doing this well. They had an immediate email out to their list with a tangible role for things for people to do. They launched that court case, which had a really clear theory of change. And they had social media content that really joined in the conversation that was happening and made ACLU like a home for people who were concerned. And it really helped to build that relationship that drove ongoing record support. So quick recap. These are some of the goals that we think digital mobilizing and organizing can help you achieve this year. And we're already working with quite a few partners on making this happen for them. So yeah, if you're interested in hearing more about anything we've discussed, like I said, it's very skimmed the surface. We have loads more detail. Just reach out to us and we'd be really happy to have a chat. And I will hand over to Stella for questions.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, both. We've had loads of questions and we definitely won't have time to answer all of them. But the ones that we don't get to, please don't worry. We'll respond to them in a blog that we will share next week, I think, with everyone alongside the recording.
One of them is about the detail of the tactic of using calendars. So I can talk about that. When I was at Greenpeace, we built a tool. Greenpeace had been asking VW for a meeting for a really long time, and they weren't giving us one. So we built a tool that enabled all of our supporters to send a calendar invite to the VW CEO. So they were able through their Outlook to send an invite. So they got bombarded with calendar invites, which was just a new way of targeting them. And we did, along with other tactics that we used, we did end up getting an invite, a meeting with them as a result. The other one I think also relates. The other question was, what are the other two tools shared alongside Who Targets Me? We'll send links to them when we share the recording of this. But one of them was called Pinpoint, which helps you to do really localized targeting and content creation. And the other one isn't really a tool, it's just geofencing ads. But Electica do some really great work in that area. So that's people that you could work on it, but that you can do geofencing through many different tools. Are there other questions, Stella, that I can't see?
Can you hear me now? Great. We're both having Wi-Fi issues today. That's fantastic. I was just talking by myself earlier. Yes, there are. So I guess one bigger question is around prioritization. So you shared amazing inspiration and lots of different things that charities can do in the run up to the election. But obviously many charities have small teams, limited resources. How would you advise that they go about prioritizing what to do in this election? Yeah, how would they go through that process? Because I suspect it's different for every charity. It's not like a blanket answer, I suppose.
Yeah, I can answer that one. Yeah, it's really tough, and I think we were very conscious when we put this together that if you're a small organization, this might feel very overwhelming, and a lot of these things might feel a bit out of reach. So we tried to kind of give examples of how you could do smaller scale versions. I think the first thing is obviously just figure out your goals first. Perhaps you're not going to have all 4 goals. Perhaps you're just going to focus on one of those things. So once you know what your goal is, I think probably the second step would be to look at the team you have and the resources you have and your current strengths and build on those first. You know, if you have a really strong social media team, you know, you've got resource to be putting daily content out on social media, then, you know, start there, look at how you can be reactive. You will have people already scanning the media and yeah, build on what you have. You know, if you're sending emails out once a week already, brilliant. Do some content planning, like looking ahead at the milestones that you know are going to be coming up. Obviously, we don't know when these milestones are going to happen yet, but knowing that they will happen and trying to do a bit of an email content calendar now. And perhaps doing some workshops internally, some planning across all teams. If you're coming away from this with lots of ideas, I think your first step is probably going to be to get a group of people together to help you achieve that. Because it can be quite hard if you're kind of coming at this on your own. So getting that internal buy-in, making some plans now while you've got a bit of space to do that, and then starting with where your resources currently are. You know, it probably doesn't make sense to launch a huge volunteer organizing program if that's brand new. Again, there are people like us that can help you figure that stuff out and figure out how to prioritize it and give you some realistic ideas of like the amount of time and the amount of budget that anything external that you want to do might require.
That's brilliant. Great, thank you. We've had a couple of questions on email, on the email program specifically, so I'll just bring them together. One is about how long email journeys need to be for them to be effective. And the other is about the asks in email. So, you know, we always recommend that emails have our single ask only. So this person is asking whether we would recommend including emails in the program without any ask at all, just focus on thank you and impact.
Yeah, on that one specifically, I think, you know, we do always advise to put an ask in every email. I think saying thank you and showing your impact are really critical things your email program should be doing. But what we often find when we're testing is that when you send an email out that is talking about impact or saying thank you, and you pivot to an ask at the back of that, that's where you often see your biggest returns. When people can see impact, it motivates them to give. So most of your email might be about the impact you're having. Always put like a PS or something at the bottom that, you know, that gives people a way to kind of show their support again. So I think you can probably do both, but they're both really critical to do in an email program. And in terms of frequency, I think I understand the question. I mean, as a rule, we always say that your supporters should be receiving, you know, an email a week, roughly, if you've got the resource to do that all year round. Mix those asks up. Obviously, you can have specific kind of campaigns and automations that focus on particular areas at any one time. But yeah, once a week, there's always something that you can talk to them about. If you've kind of got the right creative approach and you're bringing your whole organization into that conversation about what's the most important thing we can tell a supporter this week.
And I think that person was also wondering how long those journeys would be. But I think what we would say is like, don't stop talking to your audiences, basically. This shouldn't be a stop-start game, really. Another question is around building the base that you both talked about. So the person is asking, when you're building up your base, where is the balance between targeting people who look like your existing audience versus trying to diversify? And again, I feel like that maybe depends a bit on the organization and kind of their goals and everything, but how would you respond to that?
Do you want me to say that one? I think that does, yeah, it definitely, Stella, I agree, comes back to kind of working out what your organizational strategy is and where your priorities lie. My feeling is that if we aim to reach out to people that we're not already speaking to, we're going to build stronger bases. If our kind of base is made up of the sort of expected people only, then we're really limiting our reach. So a combination of the two is always really valuable, but having appropriate kind of targets and metrics that you're following and KPIs you're setting to measure how successful you're being in terms of delivering that is also really important, so that you're not kind of comparing the two. You're obviously much more likely to be able to bring in people that are more immediately kind of aligned with your organization for less money at a bigger scale. So be measuring them based on those benchmarks. And when you're trying to reach new audiences, set different kinds of benchmarks and different ways of assessing how you're achieving your goals. But yeah, I think it all comes back down to what your organization is trying to achieve. But that would be where I'd put the balance.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We only have a couple of minutes left. I think we have time for one more question. In case you didn't hear me earlier because my Wi-Fi cut out, we will be answering all the remaining questions in a blog that we will share next week. So please don't worry if we don't get to your questions, which we won't, to all of them. Somebody asked about virtual lobbying. You mentioned virtual lobbying, Barry, and somebody asked what that actually is and how it works. How do you do it?
That was actually something Helen put in, but do you want to take it, Helen, or shall I? Do you want me to?
Virtual lobbying. Sorry, I think my
I
wife.
can talk about it. No, it's fine. So I think that's basically, so Helen was talking, it's a combination of something I said and something Helen said, I think, which is these kind of hustings that are happening that will now be happening locally online rather than kind of in person, making kind of coaching your people and your volunteers in terms of going to those hustings and asking the right questions and feeling confident in asking those questions and engaging with the representatives that they're talking to, is what we mean really. And kind of like, so you doing the job of mapping where those are happening, and sometimes if you have a volunteer network, asking them to help you do that mapping, and understanding when those opportunities are, and then going out to your list to see people who are willing to join those online hustings and ask questions, and then helping to coach them to be confident in doing that. So it's very similar to kind of working with someone if you're asking them to go meet their MP, but it just means that they can do it in an online space, and also, yeah, it makes for kind of a bigger opportunity for participation, I suppose. Does that answer the question?
I think it did. That's really helpful. Thank you. I think we'll have to draw this to a close. Thank you so much, Helen and Barry. It was super, super informative. And thank you so much, everyone.